All right, today, so let's go ahead and start with the U.S. response to the VC tactics or the Viet Cong. Now, the Viet Cong were really good at hiding their stuff, and so we send our soldiers on missions called search and destroy missions. Their job is to go out there, find whatever they can that may be helping the Viet Cong in South Korea and destroy it. So a lot of times, some people will get caught up in the middle of this, and they might be again friend or foe. Nobody really knows. A lot of times we're going to have to travel down in the tunnels. We got guys going in called tunnel rats. These guys were real small and they have to go in these tunnels, try to find where the VC's hiding. A lot of times they're going to come into contact with booby traps, and they've got nothing but a flashlight, a 1911, which they try to go ahead and put silencers on. The only thing about 1911, you only get 7 shots. That's it. And so they did not want to take a shot unless they had to. Um, Booby traps would be snakes. It could be crawling, and all of a sudden you land in a spike pit. They had multiple different things, and these tunnels were set up in different ways. And our tunnel rats, as we called them, had to go in there and find this stuff. We did other things such as using napalm. Napalm is nothing more than gasoline in some kind of a jelly form. Think of like Jello. Like Jello starts off as a liquid, and as it gets cold, it eventually kind of conforms that way. And napalm's kind of the same way. So this stuff, when it's dropped, it sticks to everything. It makes it very hard to distinguish. It's going to burn everything. A lot of people get caught up in this because, again, you don't know who's friend or foe. And then we have Agent Orange. Now, we could not see in Vietnam because everything is in the treetops. I'll go ahead and show you a picture right here. If the enemy is underneath the trees, our soldiers in the helicopter can't see what's there. And so the United States developed a chemical known as Agent Orange. And Agent Orange would drop down on top of these trees and pretty much kill all the foliage within the trees, pretty much making it very visible. Negative effect, though, was cancer. I grew up and I knew a guy who served in Vietnam, and all of a sudden he noticed that he had a lump somewhere on his body. And Mr. Stiller went to the doctor, and while he's at the doctor notices this and says, "Mr. Stiller, we think you may have cancer. Can we ask you a few questions?" And he's like, "Okay, sure." First question they asked him, was he a Vietnam veteran? He answered yes. They asked him a follow up question, were you in contact with Agent Orange? He said, yes, I was. And so they diagnosed his cancer very early, and luckily he is still alive today. Now we've got a very famous picture of a bunch of kids that were exposed to maybe a napalm bombing, and as they're running away, you got American GIs kind of escorting them out, hoping that we can get these kids somewhere safe. But a lot of people, friend and foe, had to deal with this war, and a lot of people that were innocent wound up losing their lives. And as all that's making its way to the media, so is the death tolls. As you can see in this graph, we'll start here with 61 to 65. United States KIAs are at almost 2,000. Now, that didn't seem like a large amount, but then we look here, we got the NVA at 0. That is inaccurate because we did not keep accurate data on how many people in the NVA were actually killed. But as this war ramps up, more and more American KIAs are going to occur. And you can see here, we are pretty much low compared to the NVA. The NVA was losing a lot of people. This is not including the Viet Cong, which was in South Vietnam supporting the North Vietnamese as well. But from a military standpoint, we look at this and say, well, clearly the United States is winning this war. However, though, that's not going to be the case. Militarily, we do win the war, but politically and economically, it's going to be a different story, and we'll get more into that later on at some point in time. Now, as I stated earlier, our United States forces are eventually going to get kind of aggravated about this whole entire war because we were pretty much having to fight this war in handcuffs, much like when we were fighting in Korea. Our goal was to defend South Korea, and now our goal is to defend South Vietnam. Now, the VC, no matter what we did, they refused to surrender. They, remember, go back to that guerrilla tactics. Remember, they said if we cannot give them a clear victory, then they cannot win. And they're going to just keep on nagging us, and they'll lose a lot of soldiers, and then they'll go back and rebuild, and then they'll come back in, hit us hard. and then we'll pretty much repel that, and they'll kind of lay low for a while, rebuild, and they just keep this cycle going. And it's kind of like this never-ending onslaught. We think we've got them beat, we got them on the ropes, and then all of a sudden they come back and they throw a few haymakers at us, and we somehow weather that storm, and we beat the crap out of them again, and then they go away, and then all of a sudden here they come again. Think of them as kind of taking a page out of American history, because when we were fighting against the British in the American Revolutionary War, we really had no chance. But we nagged them so bad that they said, forget it, we're out. And that's what the VC does here. Another thing that made it really hard to win is that we could not invade North Vietnam. We did not want to escalate this war. We did not want China getting involved, because China was supplying North Vietnam with weapons. Also, the Soviets were supplying them. And so we are really just trying to avoid escalating this war, making it bigger, and trying to keep it from being a global war, because that was the last thing that anybody wanted. Remember, our goal was to contain communism, not escalate an actual war. All that being said, it made it very difficult for our U.S. soldiers to go over there and actually win this war, because, like I said, politically, their hands are kind of tied. Now, the Vietnamese were pretty smart. They knew that we did not want to escalate this war into other countries. And so they're going to develop what is going to be known as the Ho Chi Minh Trail. As you can see, the Ho Chi Minh Trail cuts through Laos and Cambodia as well. Over time, they will adapt and kind of cut more into Cambodia. We could not bomb Cambodia. We could not bomb Laos, because if we did, then that would be escalating the war. And that's the last thing that we want to do. And as you can see, this Ho Chi Minh Trail has several different outlets, which it pretty much supplies the Viet Cong. Now we're going to look at America in the years of 65 to 68, here pretty much at home, couple things in Vietnam, how the American public was responding to it and going forward. We're going to see that that's going to change a whole lot after 1968. 1968 was a terrible year for the war and America, because a lot of things were happening here that nobody saw coming. Now, after the Gulf of Tonkin resolution is signed, a lot of the American supporters are going to come out and support this war. Matter of fact, a lot of the president's advisors said, "We support this war. We're okay with if we need to expand this war." And the American public was all in favor of containment, trying to make sure that communism did not go any further. Robert McNair, Secretary of Defense, was one of the biggest supporters. He's getting on TV saying this is going to be an easy thing. We're going to knock it out. We're pretty much going to be winning in no time. He's going to look like a fool later on, though. And then in March of 1965, Johnson does expand the war. He expands it not by sending in troops, but by bombing North Vietnam. This is going to be known as Operation Rolling Thunder. Operation Rolling Thunder, as you can see here, we're hitting major key cities. We're trying to make sure that they stop supplying the Viet Cong there in South Vietnam. And as you can see, we are going to spend billions of dollars by dropping these bombs. Matter of fact, there was a study that came out at some point in time, and we dropped more bombs in this war, as far as megatons is considered, than all of World War II. And that is a pretty striking figure. But remember, our bombs were more powerful in this war. Now, you would think with us dropping all these bombs that Vietnam would pretty much be just a crater everywhere. Still today, it is a pretty nice place to go. I've got a good friend who lives up in Connecticut who's from Vietnam, and he goes back every so many years, and he just enjoys it. Um, he says it's one of the best places to go in the world, and you can go there pretty cheap. Well, this is the same guy that said he went over there and paid some guy $20 to throw him in the trunk of a car, smuggle him into Cambodia, just so he can say he went to Cambodia. Even though if they caught him, they were probably going to shoot him. Now, this war was a television war. It's the first time that Americans are getting to see what's happening on the TV every night. And one of the first things they're seeing is General Westmoreland going on TV saying we are at a near end, saying that the enemy is nearly defeated. And he says that very early in 65. Well, as time goes on, he keeps saying this, and it's not really clear when this war is going to end. Americans are just seeing the death tolls rise and rise and rise. And by 68, he comes out and says, "We've got them on the ropes. They are done." And then all of a sudden, they fire back after they've kind of regrouped for a while with a Tet Offensive. We'll get into more of that later on. And it makes him look completely like a fool. But even before that, people were watching the news. They're starting to see the death tolls rise and rise and rise. And they're doubting Westmoreland. They're thinking this guy has no idea of what's going on. And they're starting to wonder about this credibility gap. The American media is publishing all this stuff, and the American government is saying everything's fine. And the American people are like, no, it's not fine. We're seeing all of American GIs die. We're seeing this war nowhere near ending. And you're saying that we're going to see an end of war all of a sudden. So people start to not really trust the American government. The credibility gap grows and expands at a massive rate. And by 68, the American people were tired of what the American government was doing. And so by 1968, Johnson's approval is going to drop from 48 to 36% and even further that year after the Tet Offensive. That's where we're going to end today. Please continue working on your assignments. If you need anything, get up with me. You know how to do that. Take care, everybody.